Welcome in, everybody. Thank you for being part of Next Up. As a Nexter, we're honored to have you here. First episode of the week, and eager to have this episode roll and unfurl in front of your eyes and ears. I'm Marc Halperin, editor-in-chief of the interactive video platform Two Way, and the host here for you, your guide to everything Next Up, to bring you my exclusive reporting and analysis of all the big stories out there, the ones that matter most, and to give you a guide to what's happening next up. Joining us today, super delighted to have Marc Andreessen, the co-founder, general partner of the firm Andreessen Horowitz here. He's one of the smartest people I know, let's be honest. He won't be embarrassed to hear me say it when he gets here. We're going to talk about everything under the sun related to AI, China, and the human mind versus the artificial mind. Eager to share Marc Andreessen's wisdom with you, and that's coming up. But first, my latest reporting and analysis of what's going on here in the country. So struck by the before and after Trump. If you've got kids, this will probably be the best metaphor for you. People with kids often will say, as I do, can't remember what my life was like before I had a kid or kids, right? Just changes everything. And Donald Trump has done that too. It's in the abstract possible to remember before he was in our lives 10 years ago. But he has been such a dominant presence in our politics, has affected how both his supporters and detractors think about American politics, American culture, American economy, that it's a challenge to remember pre-Trump, and a lot of focus on post-Trump, right? I think it's one of the biggest questions we faced in our lifetimes about American politics and American life. What will it be like when Donald Trump is no longer president or able to run for president? You obviously have the prospect that he'll stick around, not running again, I don't think, but simply being a big force in American politics. And of course, if his handpicked successor, J.D. Vance, perhaps becomes president, his influence will still be felt, but it's not going to be quite the same. But what I want to talk to you about today is something I've been thinking about and talking to a lot of smart people about in politics and out of politics, which is the tendency in our internet and social media culture and in the era of Trump to attribute everything to Trump, to think that all the dynamics, all the phenomena taking place on the national town square now are derivative of Donald Trump. That history basically began in 2015, and what we're living through now is very particular stuff related to Trump. It's just not true. And I want to talk about three things. I came up with so many examples, but I want to get to Marc Andreessen, so I'm not going to do every example. But I want to talk about three things that are cast in our media culture and social media and casual conversations, again, as Trump era phenomena, when in fact, again, the antecedents go back so much further. And the first is lawfare, right? With the James Comey indictment, you see a lot of people saying, well, here's the story. Trump didn't like Comey. Comey came after Trump. So now Trump's going back after Comey. And the left says, well, Trump's escalating things. What Comey did to him, what the Trump indictments are not as bad. The indictments of Trump are not as bad as what Trump has done. And what people on the right would say, Trump is just trying not for revenge. Trump is simply trying to send a message that the only way to deter this stuff from happening in the future is to show the people on the left and the deep state who did this that they can't get away, who indicted him, that they can't get away with it. Okay, so there's some truth to that if you're zooming the camera in really tight, right, to like 2017 forward to now. But I went and did a chronology of all the lawfare, and it really started after Watergate when the independent counsel law was created, because Richard Nixon's conduct made the Congress and elite society say, you can't expect a president and Justice Department to honestly investigate the president. So in cases where there's a conflict of interest, you need these so-called independent counsels who get picked and then have unlimited budgets. And we saw administrations in both parties regret having created this, what they saw as a monster. There's so many cases, both during the independent counsel law, then it was allowed to lapse, even after, of lawfare. Lawfare has been going on pretty much since Watergate against people in the executive branch, including presidents, against people in Congress, and it's been out of control. And I've seen in my own life so many people go through a version of what Donald Trump went through and what James Comey is now going through. Of once you're investigated, and especially if you're indicted, the legal bills, the damage to personal reputation, the strain on your family. I saw people in the Clinton administration who had to lawyer up, who didn't make a lot of money before or after they entered the administration, who had hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal bills. It was unfathomable to them to have expenses like that, given how much income and wealth they had. And I saw it in the Trump and the Bush administration too, in less in the Obama administration, but some of it. And you saw it with Newt Gingrich. You saw it with Speaker Jim Wright. You saw it with the Keating Five. You saw it with President Bush's son, first President Bush's son, Neil Bush, brother of George W. He was investigated over his relationship to banks. Saw it with so many people connected to Donald Trump. This lawfare, where you can define it different ways, but the concept of prosecutions done against political enemies or for political purposes is horrible. It's so antithetical to what America's supposed to be, where justice is not supposed to be about political retribution. It's supposed to be about the opposite. It's supposed to be about honest prosecutors making honest decisions that are fair, where no one is charged or persecuted by prosecution because of their political connections or relationships or history. This did not start right now. This goes back to the 1970s. And that's important to put in context, because while the left says nothing like this has ever happened, Donald Trump is doing something no one's ever done, just not true. It's not true. Now, every case is different. And as I put my chronology together, I kind of mentally said, well, who was actually guilty or seemed guilty or not? But in some ways, it doesn't matter. Both parties have been the victims of lawfare. Both parties have been the practitioners of lawfare. Didn't start with Donald Trump. I don't know when it's going to end. I don't suspect it's going to end anytime soon. But when people look at what's going on right now, particularly with Comey, you can't say this is a Trump phenomena. You can't say Trump's taken it to a new level. It's never happened like this before. Just not true. All right. Second example is about the economic and spiritual what would I call it? Panic or troubles or decline of young men in particular in this country, and older men and younger women too. It applies to some extent to everybody, but particularly this issue of the lack of economic hope, the search for meaning amongst young men, and we've seen that put in sharp relief in the last couple weeks because of Charlie Kirk. Because of the background of the alleged assassin, but also because of the work of Charlie Kirk. And people talk about Charlie's work as they talk about it in different ways. They emphasize different things. But to me, and we saw this when he came on the show in his last interview he did here the day before he was killed, he's so relentlessly focused on home ownership, on economic opportunity and spiritual renewal, and of course, he saw those as linked. He saw the need for both economic opportunity and the need to feel part of something larger than oneself as an antidote to the long-term spiral for so many into hopelessness, spiritual hopelessness, economic hopelessness, and of course, part of why Donald Trump was able to win in 2024 was because a lot of young men of all races voted Trump. And they voted Trump in part because they saw in the inspiration of Charlie Kirk and in a rejection of economic and cultural policies of the Democrats, an opportunity to try to change the course of the country and change the course of their lives. No doubt, if you zoom in tight, the agenda, the rhetoric, the policies espoused by Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk and others, part of MAGA, were a big story of inspiration and hope for young men. But I say, widen out the aperture, pull the camera back. This has been going on pretty much also since the 1970s, and certainly received a supercharge after the economic crisis in 2008, where people felt undermined by their confidence in America, didn't feel that their trust in the United States as a place where they could have opportunity and a spirit of fulfilling, meaningful life was what their parents had. And so I say again, you can say this problem exists now. You can say Trump and Kirk found a way to address this problem for many, but this is a long-running problem. We saw it with the decline in American confidence in in government. You saw it with the decline in manufacturing. And then after the financial crisis, you saw it with people just fundamentally not believing that business and government and the economy would work for them. This problem will persist after Trump. It certainly is persisting after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, but this is not a new thing. The issue of young men in particular, I said before, it applies to everybody, is not a new thing. It's a long-running problem that neither party has sufficiently addressed. But the reason why Donald Trump won the election, as much as anything else, is people, and this happened in 2016 as well, people are not happy with the status quo. And for the people who how could anyone vote for Donald Trump? You all have people like that in your life. I certainly do. The answer is, if you're so unhappy with the status quo, if you're a young man and you don't see the opportunities to buy a home, get a job, have a good career, if you don't see spiritual fulfillment, meaning in your life, you'll say, a lot of stuff I don't like Trump, but let's blow up the status quo. That's how he won in 16. It's how he won in 24. But it's not a new issue, because the same thing basically got Bill Clinton elected in 92, George Bush elected in 2000, Barack Obama elected in 2008. That search for economic opportunity, that search for meaning and purpose, that has been long running. Vietnam, Watergate, then into the financial crisis, the decline of manufacturing. There are big structural things now that have been going on for decades. Is the Trump decade, is that an important decade in the history of this? No doubt. But I say again, this did not start with Donald Trump, and it won't end with Donald Trump either. Lastly, the thing that's in the news now, the government shutdown, the fight over how to solve having a budget for the United States. And you see contention between Trump and then Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader. This is a familiar fight, but it's covered now as if Trump's bumpy, to say the least, relationship with the Democrats is a brand new thing. That the failure of the relationship of Trump until Tuesday or Monday of this week, Trump had never met Hakeem Jeffries, and his relationship with Schumer, while long running, has become very tense. This is not new. We've had past government shutdowns, and we've had similarly tense relationships between President Clinton and the Republicans, President Bush and the Democrats, President Obama and the Republicans, and Joe Biden and the Republicans. This is not new. People act as if this is the first time there's been tense personal relationships and really sniping back and forth between the president of one party and the congressional leaders of the other when they need to make a deal to keep there from being a government shutdown. Seen it my whole career. Trump's version, certainly a little different in flavor because of social media and because of Trump's willingness to engage in insults to make his point, to try to get the upper hand. And there's no doubt that the base of the Democratic Party is super eager for there not to be a deal, because if Trump's for it, they're against it. So there's supercharging in the Trump era of a lot of things, including this, but this is not new. The dynamic's not new. The reason why we're at an impasse is not new. The role of the bases of both parties are not new. The challenge that the leaders have of both parties in Congress to make a deal without pissing off the members of their own party on Capitol Hill, these are not new dynamics. So once again, the press and Trump's opponents in the Democratic Party will say, oh, this is all just Trump and Trump's changed everything. He really hasn't. He really hasn't changed everything. And there'll be a solution to the government shutdown, and it will be along the lines of previous government shutdowns. One side will decide they're losing the PR war, and they'll sue for peace, and they'll make a deal that they wouldn't have made. In this case, both sides seem pretty confident. So I don't know how long it'll go on, but But I'll say again, it's not new. Trump's presence, Trump's dominance of the national conversation, that's new. And it causes people to forget that these things like lawfare, things like the decline in people's trust in government, decline in hope and meaning, the prospects of a government shutdown, the dynamics of government shutdown, none of that's new. Trump is such a powerful force, whether you love him or hate him. He's such a complicated force that I get why people get confused. I get why people get hyperbolic and overstate the case. That never been anything like this, haven't seen anything like this in our whole lives. It's just not the case. It's not the case. I think a lot about what things will be like after Trump. I can't remember very well, just like I can't remember before I was a dad. I can't really remember pretty well what things were like before Trump, how different they were. And it's tough to say what things will be like after Trump. I get asked about it all the time. I said I think about it all the time, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult to know because we don't know what a hovering presence he'll be and because he's been so dominant. But I can tell you that after Trump, unfortunately, there'll still be lawfare. I can tell you that after Trump, there'll still be a search on the part of young men in particular for economic hope and for purpose and meaning. And I can tell you this will not be the last government shutdown. All of these things started before Trump. All of these things will live after Trump. And again, I could give you a million other examples. The reason I'm bringing you up all of this is it's important to understand history. It's important to be able to think about things clearly and not to get caught into saying, this is all because of Trump. The flavor, the specifics of what's happening now, yeah, they're derivative of Trump. But the things that are happening, the phenomena, the long arc of history, what we are like as a nation, good, bad, and indifferent, all of that is sustaining. And Trump's just doing his chapter. The book itself is a lot longer than that. All right, next up, Marc Andreessen will be here. He is one of the most impressive people I've ever spoken to. He is a smart guy. Doesn't talk a lot about stuff. Not always in the media. So honored to have him here. Marc Andreessen's next up. Don't go away. So let me tell you a story now. It's about a guy named Leo Grillo who was on a road trip across the country, and he came across a dog. It was a Doberman who was severely underweight and clearly in big trouble. Leo rescued that dog, and he named him Delta. Sadly, though, Delta is just one of many animals that needed help, which gave Leo the inspiration to start something called Delta Rescue. It's the world's largest no-kill, care-for-life animal sanctuary. They've rescued thousands of dogs, cats, and horses from the wilderness, and they provide all their animals with what they need: shelter, love, safety, and a good home. This dedication, this everlasting love for animals, that's Leo's mission, and it's his legacy. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions from people like all of us. So if you want caring for animals to be part of your legacy, speak with an estate planner because there are tax savings and estate planning benefits to giving. You can grow your estate while letting your love for animals live well into the future. Check out the estate planning tab on their website to learn more, and you can speak with an advisor. We call a dog man's best friend for a reason. You can help those who need it most. So please, right now, visit deltarescue.org to learn more. Again, today, go to deltarescue.org. All right, next up, Marc Andreessen, innovator, creator, and damn successful businessman. Early on, he invented the Mosaic internet browser, co-founded Netscape, and since then, he has been the animating force and investor behind a lot of very successful companies, including some at the multiple billion-dollar level. Co-founded his firm, Andreessen Horowitz, general partner there, and they do a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff, and he knows a lot about a lot. Marc, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here.
Really happy to have you. I so much about AI I want to talk to you about, so we're gonna spend a lot of the time on that. First off, it's tempting to say right now, and when I think about AI, I think about where are we now and where are we going. It's tempting to say it's between like really smart, highly educated people who are adapting to it, and then people who just don't have the capacity to do that in their jobs easily. But what I'm finding is at people who do what I do, people who are well educated, very privileged. There's a have-nots there. I'm a baby using it. I'm not using it very sophisticatedly very often, but I am Einstein compared to some of my counterparts. And I'm wondering, is that how you see it? And what do you think differentiates those who understand how powerful it is even now versus those who seem oblivious to it?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of a fake story, and then there's a real story. So the fake story is kind of the classic, kind of Marxist story, which is, only the rich people have it, only the fancy people have it, the big tech companies have it. Everybody else is kind of going to be left out in the cold. That's not actually what's happening, and there's a lot of data on this now that has been released by these companies to justify what I'm about to say. So the real story is this is already probably the most democratic, small d. Technology of all time, in the sense of the very best AI in the world is fully available on the apps that anybody can download. And take your pick: ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok, Mistral, any of these. By the way, DeepSeek from China. You download any of these apps, you're getting state of the art, like the full, most sophisticated, powerful AI capability in the world. And the number of people already who downloaded these apps is north of 500 million, on its way to 1 billion. Individual people are figuring out, basically how to incorporate this in their lives. And what you see in the data is there's, maybe what you'd expect, which is there are a slice of people who just use these new systems all the time, like literally all day for everything. And, in a lot of cases, they're reporting that they're getting enormous benefits from that. And then there's a lot of people who are experimenting and trying to figure it out. And then there are people who are just, not, for whatever reason, not interested or not engaged. But I would say it's incredible out of the gate how distributed this technology already is. And then I just say, I don't have, with all my resources and with all my connections, I don't have access to a better AI than the one that you just download off the App Store. And so I think this is actually just an incredible story of the most advanced technology in the world being available to everybody right out of the gate.
You got to get people to use it to take advantage of it, right? So I've got a friend who's drafted a book and took it to his agent, and the agent said, it's 140,000 words. You got to cut it down to 70,000. And I said, if you try to do that by hand, even if you hire someone, it's going to take you months. I can do it in an hour. And I can say to AI, don't change the style, don't change the tone, don't cut anything that, ruins the story. And he said, that's immoral. The publisher will be mad that I did it that way. It's not right. How should I answer that person?
Yeah, so the exact same arguments, emerged, years ago with the introduction of computers, right? I actually just I've been watching a lot of old science fiction movies with my kid, and there's this famous science fiction movie Tron from 1982, that had the first kind of the first real computer graphics movies, and it was disqualified for an Oscar for special effects because it used computers, right? And so there's this kind of long tradition of whatever the new tool is sort of illegitimate, and there must be something wrong with it. In this particular case, there's no doubt there are people who feel the way that your friend feels. That issue was actually litigated in the last Hollywood strikes, in the movie and the film and TV side of the creative profession.
Yeah.
The last round of strikes it's actually funny. They started as streaming strikes, and then AI hit, and then it became the AI strikes. But the settlement with the studios, actually with the unions, was that the following, which is, if you're a writer and you use AI, that's totally fine. What's not allowed is for the studio to basically use the AI and then claim it was a writer. But basically, what the unions and studios in Hollywood decided was, it's another tool. It's like the word processor. It's like the personal computer. It's like it's like using a printer instead of writing out a manuscript by hand. And so I think there are people who feel like your friend does, but I think the world is already adapting very fast to using it. And frankly, one of those reasons you probably pointed out to your friend is I don't even know that anybody can tell anymore. Right. And so, if you're going to have a moral prohibition on something that people can just do and nobody knows about, is that really going to work? And so I think those sort of self-imposed barriers are probably going to collapse quite quickly. I
hope so. Fortune put out a list of the top American companies using AI. Alphabet, Visa, JP Morgan Chase, top 3. We talked about just now on an individual level. If you were the CEO of a company or advising a CEO, how important is it to be on that list? In other words, how important is it to get your company to adapt, whether it's for internal or consumer facing? How important is it right now?
Yeah, so this goes back to actually where we started, which is, and in fairness, the old model of adapting actually computers, when computers came out, the old model was the largest institutions get technology first, and then everybody else gets it later. And so, the way the computer rolled out was the government actually got mainframe computers first. starting in the 1940s. And then big companies got computers, mainframes in the 1950s, 1960s. Small companies started to get computers, what were called mini computers at the time in the 1970s. And then we as individuals only got PCs in the 1980s. And so it took 40 years for basically technology to cascade down from the largest organizations in the world to small businesses and to the individual. This technology, AI, is going the opposite, which is like I said, the most sophisticated capabilities are available on the consumer app today. And then what we're finding is consumers are adapting the fastest, just individuals in their lives. The small businesses are then adopting right after that because, a small business typically is just, a person who's, making decisions for their own business. Very, very easy to do new things. Big companies are then following small companies. And so, the companies on that list, obviously some of them are doing interesting things, but in general, big companies right now are pretty tied up in knots internally, kind of in all their processes and in all their legacy systems and all their, organization and training but their unions and like all the other issues they have to deal with. They're actually relatively slow to adopt compared to individuals and small businesses. And then government is the late adopter, right? And so governments, of course, are already trying to figure out, kind of how to adapt to this technology, but they're not adopting it very fast because they can't because of all their rules and systems and bureaucracy. And so there's been a real inversion of how technology moves through our society that's really AI is becoming a case study for. And so the answer to your question is, I think big company CEOs, and many of them are doing this, but I think they really have to force the issue on this inside their companies because these big companies are just such now giant bureaucracies with so many rules that like by default they'll smother new ideas. And so it's a real act of leadership to get on a list like that and be able to actually say kind of with pride like we're on the leading edge.
So if your friend owned a bakery and he said, Mark, I want you to come in and help me figure out how to use AI. Well, how could someone who owns a single storefront bakery use it now?
Yeah, there's dozens of ways. It obviously depends on what your business goals are.
They're baker dozens of ways.
There are, exactly. And so, look, the first thing you can do is just say, look, review, do a performance review for me. Like, just feed in, here's my staffing schedule. What do you think of it? Give me a critique of it. Here's the last, 100 emails we've gotten from customers. What are the patterns of that? Here's the copy for the ad that we're going to place in the local newspaper, put up on Facebook or whatever. Like, what do you think of this? Let it do a performance assessment. A lot of people find it very effective for personal coaching. And so, the owner might use it that way or might, ask the employees to use it that way. And then I think where the power really kicks in is, okay, you're a small business owner, you got one bakery. Now you want to have two bakeries, right? And you want to have a brand. And then maybe if that works, you're going to have 5 and then 50 and then 500. And then you're going to have, packaged products going to supermarkets and so forth. And then there you basically turn the AI into a thought partner, right? And you basically say, okay, what are the best ways to expand from a single outlet to multiple and to turn this into a larger business. And, the AI, it's been, because it's been trained on, some large percentage of the total amount of human knowledge, like it has within it all the information on how, Ray Kroc turned McDonald's from, a single restaurant into McDonald's and how all these other, entrepreneurs before actually did this. And so it can, explain with you and help you, figure out how to do this for your own business. And then, the thing that you get into as you use it is basically, it's just like, wow, it's like having the world's best coach, mentor, therapist, right, advisor, board member. But it's like infinitely patient, right? And so it's like, it's happy to have the conversation. It's happy to have the conversation 50 times. It's happy if you admit your insecurities, it'll coach you through them. It's happy if you run wild speculations that don't make any sense. It's happy to do all that at 4 a.m. And so the people who are using it a lot are finding it actually turns out to be very supportive. In their real lives.
Could you say, here's the recipe for our best-selling cinnamon rolls? How could I make it better? Would that?
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. You can say. And by the way, part of the art of AI, right, is figuring out what questions to ask it, right? Because it turns out that it can answer many different questions. So you have to actually get creative at this. And so you can say, like, here's my current recipe. How might I improve it? You can also say, what's the best cinnamon roll recipe in the world? Work backwards from that. And then you could also say, look, I want to make the best one in the world, but I need to do it at a tenth the price. What are the ways to cost optimize?
Right. All right. So the other
something you can ask it. Go ahead. By the way, the other thing you can ask it is you can ask it, what question should I be asking? Right. And so you can plug in, I run a bakery, ... What question should I be asking? And you'll find it's actually a thought partner in helping you even figure out what questions to ask.
Right. Brilliant. So the other day I said, I want to know every Republican who voted against any of the articles of impeachment against Bill Clinton. Give me the list of every Republican. And it came back and it listed some Democrats. in mixed in there. And it said they were Democrats. And I said back, I only want Republicans. And it said, oh, sorry, I inadvertently included Democrats. Now, I could understand a human being, a junior researcher doing that, but how could AI make a mistake, have it pointed out to it and say, oh yeah, how could that be in the model?
Yeah, so this gets technical, and I'd be delighted to get deeply into the technical details. I'll try to resist. It's a new kind of computer, and the way to think about it is computers up until now have been what you might call like hyperliteral, right? Where computers up until now, like they do math really fast, but like they do the same thing every single time. They exhibit no creativity whatsoever. And if you expect them to exhibit creativity, like they just can't do it. And then if they make a mistake, it's because the human programmer made a mistake. And that has made computers, super useful for running like, large math exercises or, doing a lot of things that the computers do. But of course, computers have never been creative, right? Computers never been able to write you poetry or work with you on your cinnamon bun recipe. Like it's just never even been a thing that we can think about. So it's never had kind of that human element of creativity to it. This is just a completely different kind of computer that has these characteristics that are frankly more like a person. Which is it's right most of the time. It occasionally gets things wrong. When it gets things wrong, it's able to self-critique. And you have to kind of work with it the way that you work with a person. And so you have to basically figure out as you use it, like you want to take advantage of the fact that it's creative, and then you want to be tolerant to the fact that it's not always correct, just like you're working with a person. Now, having said that, when it makes easily avoidable mistakes, where it's just like makes boneheaded fact mistakes, we call those hallucinations. The latest systems are much, much, much better at not doing that. They're much more accurate. And in particular, for anybody watching this, if you want to kind of see this in action, I'll just give an example. If you buy the full version of ChatGPT, there's a model called GPT-5 Pro, which is the latest one. And then there's something called Deep Research, which is a switch that you turn on. And if you use GPT-5 Pro with Deep Research and you ask a question like that, like at this point, I think I wouldn't say it's bulletproof, but like it's really good at staying factually grounded. And literally you can watch it work, and it'll literally go out on the internet. It'll like check all the authoritative sources, and it'll go on congress.gov or whatever and check the voting records and verify that. And so I think that problem is being ironed out, kind of as we speak.
Yeah. For people watching, listening who haven't used it or not used it much, the thing you said about good prompts is so key. And that what does differentiate the people really getting productive at it from not. And one of the things that you and I have talked about is it is hilarious. It can write, if you give it the right prompts, it can write stuff that is so funny. And where does that come from? How does it have the capacity to understand? Because humor involves metaphors and sophistication and humanity. How can it do that?
Yeah, so this gets to this idea of how it's trained. So basically, what these systems are is they're basically the accumulation of human knowledge over time. Sort of, and by the way, most of the training data is just literally the internet, right? So one of the reasons that this is happening now and not 20 years ago is because the internet finally got big enough, but just the web finally got big enough to have like all this information in it, right? And so if you go out on the internet today, you can find, all kinds of written material online that's, you can find like, classic screenplays from, the golden age of cinema for 100 years ago. You can find, literally, people joking with each other on social media all day long. You can find, professional comedians doing oral histories of, how they did great comedy. So there's incredible amounts of information that are online about comedy and about what's funny. And then all of that information is in the training data. So it's all kind of fed into the AI during the training process. And the AI basically processes it through like any other kind of data and comes out the other end and just basically is like, now the AI is a world-class expert in humor, right? And of course, look, you could be an expert in humor and not actually be funny, right? And they're I don't know, probably professors of comedy or something like that in colleges who aren't very funny. But like it knows so much about what humor is. It knows so much about the pattern of jokes. It knows so much about what make people laugh. It has so many examples, to be able to learn from. And look, professional comedians will tell you there are patterns to comedy, right? There are. I worked with a professional comedian once on something, and he said, the key to it is specificity. Like you just like nail the reference. Another comedian will say the key is, timing or pacing or the callback to the previous joke or whatever, the punchline, whatever it is. And so it knows all that, and then it's just it's now so powerful that it's actually quite honestly I find, especially at like 2 a.m, I find these things hysterical.
Yeah. All right. Just a minute left before we take a break. What's your advice to an individual who's barely used it or hasn't used it? What's your advice to them to sort of how to get started?
Yeah. So, I mean, by far the best way to do it is just download it and use it. And like I said, there's several good, Elon's got Grok, which is now fantastic. By the way, it's actually interesting how these things are getting built into products now. So, the new versions of X, formerly Twitter, actually, if you go to any post on X, there's a little Grok icon that looks like a little black hole icon in the upper right corner of the post. And if you click on it, it actually calls up the Grok AI to explain the post to you, right? And so, like, it literally is like it can explain to you that if there's some post on politics or something, you don't understand what's happening. You just lost the thread of the topic. You just like bonk that button, and you get in a dialogue with the AI. Little AI window pops up and explains the post, and you can ask it for more details. And so it's like built into that product. Google's actually built AI now into search, and so now when you do searches, it has this thing called AI mode, and you bonk on it, and it in addition to getting the 10 blue links from Google, you now get into an AI dialogue. And so you just start using those products, or you just download one of these apps and start using it. And like I said, a really great question is like, okay, how do I use you? Right. Like, or you can say, teach me works really well. You can say, teach me how to use you in the best way. Teach me how to use you for my business, for this project. And it'll, these things love to talk, and it'll happily sit there and chatter away, and take you through it.
Yeah. My sort of analog to the way you just said it is, ask it for what you want as specifically as possible. Don't hold back. Be really specific, and it will do what you ask. All right, more with Marc Andreessen. That's next up. Stay tuned. If you're 64 years old or older, this is an important announcement. The Department of Justice recently sued 3 major Medicare brokers for claiming they were unbiased while allegedly pushing people into plans that got them the biggest kickbacks. It's true, so many insurance agents, they just can't be trusted, but you also cannot rely on the government to give you the best information that you need either. That's why I want you to know about something called Chapter. Chapter was started by people who went through all of this personally after their own parents were pushed into the wrong Medicare plan by an agent who was more focused on commissions than on good care. Chapter's mission is very simple. They want to give every American the honest, straightforward Medicare advice that they deserve. And here's what makes them different from everybody else. They're the only Medicare advisor that compares every plan nationwide, not just a few. That saves their clients an average of $1,100 a year. There's really no reason not to call. It's quick, it's easy, and they can review your options in under 20 minutes. If you're in the right plan already, they'll let you know that. But if there's a better plan, they'll help you make the switch. This could be the most important call you make this year. Dial pound 250 and say Chapter Medicare to get peace of mind. Again, that's pound 250 and say Chapter Medicare. All right, welcome back. We're here with Marc Andreessen still. Marc, are you of the school that says that the United States is in an existential struggle with China? Do you subscribe to that point of view?
I was going to say, I hope that's not true, right? I hope this is not going to walk all the way to the situation that we ended up in with the Soviet Union. Like Mark, like you, I grew up in an era. I'm sure. See if you remember this. I growing up thinking there was a significant chance that we're all going to die, from nuclear war. And so I hope it doesn't get back to that level of intensity. But I do think there are a lot of historical parallels to what happened between the U.S. and the USSR in the 20th century. Happening right now. And, you have, 2 hegemonic superpowers that both have, visions, they both have visions of how society should be structured and how the sort of global political system should be structured. And obviously I think, America's is better, but they both have visions. They're both working, to that end. And then they both have, national strengths and weaknesses, militarily, technologically, economically, culturally. There is that kind of geopolitical fight happening. So I hope we stay in this kind of, I don't know what you call it, mode of co-opetition, tension without military strife. I hope we stay, in that mode, but it's a sufficiently fraught situation, that we certainly need and by the way, have a national strategy for how to win that. And we need to make sure that we do.
Right. Do they have any 1 or 2 advantages over us in terms of AI?
Yeah, they do. So they have they have two advantages. And by the way, I should say we have many advantages. I'm very bullish on the U.S. and I think we're better positioned. I wouldn't trade places with them, and we could talk about that. But having said that, they do have strengths, and in particular, they have two key strengths. Number one is they do have the advantages of a command economy. And, like generally speaking, or 100%, like I'm on the side of like, free markets and decentralization and, having a dynamic economy. And we have advantage, we have much better entrepreneurial ecosystem and so forth. Having said that, they do have this advantage where when their government decides that something's a national priority, like they just do it. And by that, I mean, not only does the government do it, but they just tell the private sector, you do the following. Right. And so they have this, thing the Soviets had where the entirety of society is able to, go up against single missions. We're just a lot more fractious than that. And so, we kind of navigate our way through this on our own way, but not, we don't have anywhere near that level of organization. So that gives them the ability to execute against specific areas of focus in arguably a superior way. And then the other advantage that they have is, we in the U.S. voluntarily deindustrialized, starting 30, 40 years ago. And that industrialization, the making of physical things, and in particular the making of machines, has moved substantially to China. And the way that we think about machines now is that they're basically, they're the hardware version of software, right? They're the embodied version of AI. And so, the car is not just steel and glass anymore. It's a robot on wheels. The drone isn't just a toy anymore. It's a computer, that flies through the air, that navigates itself. Robots are coming. We're gonna live in a world that's just like completely awash with robots in the decades ahead. And China's just like, as a consequence of the last 30 years of policy, China's just like way ahead on everything involved in building physical things. This administration and others have had visions of how to recapture that, but we have a long way to go.
As the U.S. tries to become more of a manufacturing country, it would seem to me AI integrated into manufacturing is extremely powerful. Yeah. Are they ahead of us on that? As you said, our biggest companies here are slow adapters of AI. Are there big manufacturers now using AI more than we are?
Yeah. So I think Unleashed, we could do that faster and better. Like if we could manufacture in the U.S. the way that we used to 30 or 40 years ago, we could definitely do that faster for a variety of reasons, including we have better software engineers. We have a more flexible and dynamic economy. We could do that faster. The big issue is just we have chosen to not be a manufacturing economy. Like we chose to move that offshore. For a very long time we were very proud that we moved that offshore for a variety of reasons. And so the challenge is not so much that that we couldn't in theory do exactly what you just described better than they can. It's just like if you're not manufacturing things, then you can't do that at all, right? Which is the situation that we've worked ourselves into. And so their car, just to pick one, their car industry is like moving like incredibly fast with this. Look, we have to, we have our superstar companies. We have Tesla, in particular that's world class at this, and still, better than the Chinese today. But like the Chinese are moving really fast. And if you talk to people, we don't have a lot of exposure to Chinese cars in the U.S. because the trade barriers are so high that they really are not cost effective to sell here. But if you go to the Middle East and talk to just like normal affluent people, they're not driving Chinese cars by choice. Not because they can't afford a Mercedes, because the Chinese cars are better. And the Chinese cars are like full self-driving, electric, autonomous, voice AI. Like they're like state of the art. They're exactly what you're talking about. And we still have car companies, but ex-Tesla, mainly what they do is they assemble, third-party, parts that are coming from other places. The Chinese are just doing a much more specific, advanced level of unified hardware and AI manufacturing. Yeah, by the way, you see that in drones, like virtually the entire global drone industry and virtually the entirety of the drone industry, in terms of people using drones in the U.S., like virtually 100% of those drones are made in China. And again, that's not because we couldn't make them. It's because we chose a set of policies that drove that right. Industry offshore.
We better start making them. I want to talk to you about Silicon Valley. As much as it's been covered for the last quarter century, I don't think the coverage is even close to explaining how significant it has been. They're great stories like yours of people who have been so successful, but the influence over our culture, our government, our economy, and the world is just so massive. If someone like you understands engineering, markets, economics, technology, there was a long period where you had to live in Silicon Valley if you wanted to succeed and have the relationships and the interactions. Is that still the case? Is Silicon Valley still a place you have to physically be if you want to excel, someone with those skills?
Yeah, so I should start by saying I'm an import, right? So I'm from out of town. I grew up in the rural Midwest, in northern Wisconsin, kind of in the tundra. And so I didn't grow up here. I didn't get to participate kind of in the heyday of back when we actually. By the way, it was called Silicon Valley because they originally made chips here, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of manufacturing, they of course long since stopped doing that. That's now thoroughly illegal in California. And so, I wasn't here for that. I wasn't here for the personal computer. And so I'm an inheritor of, the phenomenon that you're describing that other people built.
What year did you show up?
Yeah, so I showed up in 1994. And, Silicon Valley is really dated. It sort of dates to the early 50s, with Hewlett Packard in particular as sort of the original company.
But the 90s is when so much of what we think of now in terms of consumer facing, social media, internet, right? I mean, that's a pretty big dividing line. So yeah, you missed the Hewlett Packard days, but you were there for the phase we're in now, right?
Yeah, but I just bring it up because basically the history of Silicon Valley is it's a sequence of waves, right? And so it's this is part of what makes it special is this AI is like wave 9 or wave 10 of these like just major basic microprocessors and smartphones and kind of cloud and social and mobile, like all these kind of the PC kinds of all these waves have hit. So anyway, my point is like in the Valley, like we're the inheritor of a tradition and a system and a model that was built by other people. And then to your question on geographic focus, this is very interesting thing playing out right now. So a couple things. So one is like, look, like I said, like the technology that's built in Silicon Valley is diffusing nationally and globally into ordinary people's hands, like at a far faster rate than in the past. So you don't have to be in Silicon Valley to get access to the best technology. Like you can now get that from everywhere. And that's very important because that didn't used to be the case. Having said that, if you want to be at the company or start a company that's going to build the leading edge technology itself from scratch, I would say at this point, like maybe you don't need to be in Silicon Valley proper, but like you better strongly consider, and if you're not, there's maybe 3 or 4 other places in the country where you can give it a shot. But primarily the people who want to do that are coming to Silicon Valley. And the important thing in the last 5 years that happened actually was during COVID, we all thought actually that the Silicon Valley geographic concentration was actually unwinding. And we thought that, virtual work and remote work and, you could be able to start companies everywhere. And you had all these kind of booms happening in places like Miami and Austin and other places with lots of high-tech entrepreneurs. And, it felt like the whole thing was, really distributing out. AI basically has snapped everything right back into the 20-mile square radius around where I sit to just an incredible degree. So I would say like almost 100% of the actually interesting AI companies in the West are happening at sort of ground zero right here in Silicon Valley. And then, by the way, and this is good news and bad news, by the way, the other place in the world where these things are happening is basically, the Shanghai, Beijing axis in China.
Right.
These are the two places. And then you also say a very important thing, which is it's just not happening elsewhere in the world. And there's kind of, high-tech clusters in other places, but, if you're a sharp AI person and, I'll just pick on one, London, like you have already moved to California or you're going to,
right.
Because they have just, essentially decided to outlaw it. The EU has decided to outlaw it. And so, people are being driven to the US and to California, I think in a way that's even more concentrated than it was when I first got here.
All right, last question. Name inventions in human history that have more benefited the lives of individuals than the iPhone.
Oh, well, I mean, if you go far enough back, electric lighting was a big deal. Steam power was a big deal. Obviously antibiotics are the easy call. I mean, the internet itself, electricity, it's indoor plumbing. It's hard to question those. And people sometimes say like, you guys aren't inventing important things. Like, why aren't you inventing something as important as indoor plumbing? And it's like, well, that was a big one, I concede, but like, we did solve that problem. We could move on to other things.
I would, if you said, give up your iPhone or switch to an outhouse, I would switch to an outhouse.
I think there's a lot to that, and maybe the serious point underneath that, which I
was being serious. I was being serious.
No. Well, no, but so maybe or just say the generalization you can make from that is I think people maybe systematically underrate the importance of communication. So being able to be connected with other people and then being able to actually, be able to learn things, be able to get access to information, like those two things, there's something in the culture, I was just saying in Silicon Valley culture, there's something where like those are like looked down on as less important. And I actually think to your point, like they're actually incredibly important and they're foundational for everything else that people do. I mean, human connection and human learning is both of those are at the center of everything that we do. And so, yeah, no, I would make that same trade.
Here's my idea for a reality show. You put someone like us in Cleveland for a week without their smartphone, and give them a series of tasks which they would otherwise conduct with their smartphone. Good luck.
By the way, I had relatives in the 70s who still had outhouses, right? Like,
the past, it's fine.
The past was 100%. Well, it's fine. In Iowa in January, you start to reconsider whether that's fine in the middle of the night when it's 40 below. But the past was not that long ago.
I know.
That's right.
All right, Marc Andreessen, very grateful to you. Scratch the surface. I had a list of about 15,000 questions that AI winnowed down to me to 1,500, but we didn't get to them all. Very grateful to you, though, for making time. And again, just not many people on the planet who understand this stuff as well as you do. So grateful to you for sharing, and hopefully we inspired a few people to learn how to use the latest technology. Thank you.
Good. Fantastic. Thank you, Mark.
All right, one more thing. Next up is Last Up. I've been surprised and disappointed with how little the voice and sounds and pictures of Charlie Kirk himself have been played since he was assassinated. I think it's important for people, particularly in parts of the country who never heard from him, to get to see him. Here's a clip I like. It's vintage Charlie from the American Comeback Tour, speaking at Florida State University. This is from this past February.
We will not save the country just through politics. Politics is a means towards an end, a means towards liberty, but liberty is not man's idea, it's God's idea. And we are only able to experience that liberty if we are a moral and religious people. And I'll close with this statement with this, that the Constitution is incompatible with a faithless nation. You will not have a free society if the country goes atheist. You will not have a free society if the country goes secular. That sounds provocative, but it's true. Is that liberty and freedom cannot coexist with a nation that does not believe in a higher power. Because eventually, you're going to want to have some form of meaning in your life, and usually that meaning is left-wing politics. And I'm not trying to pick on all those people chanting out there, because they're actually crying for help, and I mean that. Because how many of them, and I mean this, how many of them do you think go to church on a regular basis? Almost none. And that's not me picking on them. But there's a reason, because they're having a quasi-religious experience right now. They're all chanting at the same time. They feel like they're part of something bigger. They think they're fighting evil, which of course they're not. But there's a religious element to that. When America was at its best, when you didn't march on the streets, but instead you went to the church and bowed before your creator to go find your meaning. And so when they're chanting out here, you should love on them and be like, do you believe in God? Like, have you been to church? And I guarantee almost to a person, 99% of the activist left on this campus has either a bad experience with religion, doesn't think that God loves them, doesn't think that God is good, or they're an atheist. So you fill that void with left-wing politics, because left-wing politics mirrors religion. It feels like a religious experience. So there's a thinker by the name of Emil Durkheim, which some of you guys may or may not know, who talked about what is religion. And he says the things that have in common of religion is that people will all say the same thing. They'll meet on a regular basis. They'll agree on an objective. That is the Black Lives Matter movement or the trans movement or whatever. And we should say, hey, instead of making those things your God, you should believe in the God of the Bible, the God that loved you enough to send his son to die for you so that you may live forever. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Brilliant guy. And again, if you want to understand him, if you didn't know him, or if you want to remember him, I recommend his own words rather than the words of his critics and others. That's it for today's show. We'll be back on Thursday, a brand new episode. In the meantime, I always like to hear from you. Tell me what you thought of today's episode. Send me an email at nextuphalperin@gmail.com. You can always find the program on X, Instagram, TikTok, our handles there, Next Up Halperin. And watch us on YouTube, like, subscribe, etc., etc., etc. youtube.com/@nextuphalperin. And of course, subscribe, download, go to see us or listen to us on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your finer podcasts. We want you to always know what's coming up next up.